sure we have time for a dialogue with our two remarkable keynote speakers today. But before we do that, I do have one burning question. So Rector Ignatieff said that we are engaged in a battle over the very meaning of law. Vivek described a global epidemic of injustice. To me, that is a call for action. So I would like to ask each speaker to talk about what all of us sitting here in this room today could do. We have a remarkable group assembled here, both of public interest legal leaders, but also leaders of the private bar. So what is the call to action? What is the next step?
Boy, I always like these easy questions. I mean, and I don't mean this in a trivial way, I guess I am playing for time, but I want to get Vivek Maru into every law school in the world, basically. Mm-hmm. First of all, no, because I think that...
That's my next action item, is getting him to Stanford.
The next act is to get Vivek out there. What he says corresponds very much to my own experience. In another life, I write books, and I've just written a book called The Ordinary Virtues. Mm-hmm. And I spent a lot of time in favelas and in illegal settlements on the edge of Pretoria, South Africa. And it is very, very striking how much these are communities beyond the law. That is, without law. Without municipal services, without policing, without education, without anything, particularly the illegal settlements on the edge of Pretoria. Favela is a different story. What is very striking is how much difference it makes if you suddenly get semi-decent policing, how much difference it makes if you get some kind of recourse to law. These are not lawless communities. What struck me very forcibly in both places was they can create a moral order that is self-sustaining, provided they are not preyed upon either by criminals or preyed upon by a predatory state. The only way to make sure they're not preyed upon by a predatory state is to have barefoot lawyers. That is, paralegals in there representing and advocating and making sure the cops don't whack them over the head on racial grounds or on extortionate grounds. So I guess I'm just confirming from my own work the tremendous importance of what Vivek is saying, and secondly, the enormous importance of making young professionals training in universities around the world aware of the transformative potential of doing this work and supporting this work. And then I suppose third, the importance for law firms and also private foundations to step up and begin to support the funding that this requires to get a genuinely global network. And the final point, which you said in passing, which I thought was crucial, is that flying in from Macedonia as a consultant and bolting something onto, Gujarat is not going to fly. The great thing about this is that it's local law, local people, local language. And this has local legitimacy as a result. And the consultancy industry that we have created since the transitions in '89 have done some good, but an awful lot of harm. So I just wanted... I'm really underscoring some of the points that I heard from Vivek's wonderful talk.
Thank you so much, Michael. I couldn't have said that better. I would say one action item is for the world to come together to challenge rule by law in Hungary and ensure that CEU, which is a vital institution for all of us, that it is able to continue to thrive. And I was amazed to see the outpouring of support from people across Hungary, some of whom were former students, some of whom had never even seen CEU, to defend academic freedom and to defend that institution. And so I hope we continue to see that kind of popular support. I also just wanted to say, you mentioned Pretoria. South Africa is actually, for our movement, kind of our origin story. Paralegals go back to the 1950s in South Africa. They were often in ANC offices helping people to survive apartheid. But as you saw when you went there is a lot of work left to be done. So I would, in terms of the people in this room, practically speaking, I would say 3 things. One is adopt a legal empowerment perspective. Our profession has let the law be too complicated. Try to demystify it, simplify it, equip people to advocate for themselves. Let go of some of that expert culture that I think is so much a part of our profession. Number 2, work with paralegals. And Michael, I swear I didn't pay him anything. He kind of made this pitch for me. I mean, work with paralegals. Whether you're a public interest lawyer at a public interest law organization or whether you're doing pro bono, find groups who deploy paralegals as partners. And I would invite you to join, all of you in this room, I hope, will join this global network dedicated to legal empowerment. It takes a couple minutes to set up a little profile. And you can find in any, you name it, there's 120 countries, there are organizations who are members of this network who are deploying paralegals. Reach out to the ones near you or in the places that you're working and connect with them, partner with them, support them. And then thirdly, I'm repeating Michael again, is invest. Whether you have $10 or $100 or $1 million, consider putting some of it into grassroots legal empowerment. It is important in its own right, and it is also crucial for almost everything else that we care about.
Thank you. Now we're ready to hear from all of you.
Purpose is not to reduce you to stunned silence. Oh, I see one back there.
There's one right there.
Thank you very much for perfect presentation. My name is Leila Ali Karami, and I'm from Iran. I'm glad to see lots of lawyers here and colleagues. And my question is that while we are talking about helping citizens, empowering people, and through legal work, what we are failed to support our colleagues. Right now, my colleagues, Abdul Fattah Soltani, he's in prison. He's a lawyer like us. And he received 18 years in jail. What we have done for him. And another colleague, she served 3 years. Another colleague, he served 6 years. I think we also need to look after ourselves. And I really want to see your perspective on this, how we can support our colleagues in many countries. It's not only Iran. I'm sure that our colleagues in China, in Middle East, in Pakistan, in many countries, they're facing threat, they're facing intimidation, and they are persecuted because they are working to establish rule of law. And we really failed. I've never heard some organization, they talk about these lawyers, but I've never heard about them in, lawyers talking about them. Thank you.
Do either one of you want to speak to that?
Well, my wife always warns me about giving people lectures, and I'm hopeless. I give everybody. I spend my whole life telling other people what to do. I'm about to do it again and say you just regard it as an incorrigible personal defect. But I do think the professional legal associations of countries around the world, the professional legal associations of which you are a member, can, without violating their neutrality, their political neutrality, or their professional obligations, can stand up and defend lawyers in other countries and can make public declarations. I think it's an important thing to do. I don't think it compromises your professional responsibilities. I don't think it drags you into politics. You just say, there is a thing called rule of law. It has basically the same form in every society, although societies are very different. I just think it's possible for the bar associations around the world to do this. But let me just remember what my wife always says, I'm not a member of any bar association, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm giving you advice from the outside, but it's just friendly advice, I hope.
Maybe being a lawyer, you guys will allow me just a little bit more room. I would say it's not just possible, it's necessary. And it's not just, it is lawyers, public interest lawyers who are under threat in many places. It's also community legal workers. One of the guy I was calling Kush, the reason I can't say their names is because they work in dangerous situations. And one of his colleagues who works just down the coast from him got a death threat a few weeks ago. And especially people who work to protect the land and environmental rights. Those are some of the most vulnerable. Global Witness organization has documented hundreds of killings of advocates of community land and natural resource rights because it cuts right to the heart of power. And we are launching a global campaign in January for the protection and financing of justice defenders. And I would put in that category both the barefoot lawyers and the lawyers themselves. And so I think it's the times call on us. Democracy is under threat, freedom is under threat. The times call on all of us to go past our day-to-day and to stand up and challenge that trend.
I think if I could just add one little note here to, in for a penny, in for a pound. I've made a fool of myself once. Why not make a fool of yourself twice on this issue? But the one thing I notice about the rule of law is it really is indivisible. And one of the things, I was just in Warsaw recently talking to people in commercial practice. That is, people who do mergers and acquisitions and real estate deals, and they represent big international interests that are in Warsaw. There's a period in which you can think that critiques, attacks on the rule of law that are happening kind of somewhere else don't affect commercial issues, commercial transactions, business transactions. There's a kind of weird dissociation that you can develop if you're in commercial private litigation. You think, yeah, I know that rule of law is not in such great shape in Hungary, but I can do a deal here, nonetheless. I think the thing that everybody has to understand is that it is indivisible, and slowly you can transition into a society in which it doesn't matter how big you are here, you don't have the legal stability to operate and get contracts going on. And I have heard, this is a very controversial remark, I may just be wrong, that one of the little kind of hypocrisies we allow is that, I heard a European ambassador tell me, rule of law is very, very important for the small and medium enterprise, right? But the big guys depend on something else. And we know what that is. They depend on a phone call. They depend on personal relations. I've never forgot a story from my political career about this precise issue in which I once asked the chairman of a Canadian multinational when I was in politics, who did enormous amounts of business in China. I mean, billion-dollar business in China. And I said, just, to make nice conversation as you do at a dinner, I said, who does your legal work in China? And he said, he was kind of vague. He said, there's some guy up a back street in Hong Kong, he kind of writes the contracts. I said, I'm astonished. You're doing billion-dollar business. He said, he looked at me as if I didn't understand something. He said, when I have something to do in China, I play a round of golf. Right? Do you understand what I'm saying? That is, the ways in which the big guys operate, it just goes outside of the legal realm altogether to political deals. The smaller firms, the lower firms, the people trying to absolutely have to have something that looks like contractual solidity under their feet. But the big guys walk around thinking, well, it just depends on who my golf partner is. And this is, I think, a much wider global trend than and I'm not singling out a particular country. I just think this is a reality of big law that has to be understood. But my worry is that sooner or later, a Siemens, a Mercedes, an Audi, Novartis, Bombardier, Boeing, all these people, if they stand by and watch the rule of law basically disintegrate in these societies, global trade, global commerce, the things that have actually been good for these societies, slowly begin to fall apart. And boards of governors will look at these deals and think, what is holding this thing together? Are you seriously telling me that I'm going to invest $500 million because you've had a good round of golf with a senior leader of a regional party? I mean, come on. Do you know what I'm saying? So rule of law is an indivisible thing. And so it starts with the barefoot lawyers, but start thinking about the company that runs that plant and who it's affiliated to and what the ownership structure is. They may be thinking, we don't care about pollution compliance in Gujarat, but we darn well do comply about whether we can do a deal that allows us to operate somewhere else. So it's that sense of indivisibility that I think really needs to get into everybody's head. And there I've now made the fool of myself that I said I wouldn't be. So,
Thank you. There's a mic coming.
Hi, my name is Sailesh. I work with something called Rule of Law Expertise UK. It's a DFID, a UK government-funded body which provides funding for pro bono work. Thank you both for fascinating, mind-blowing talks, especially for a non-lawyer. I have to admit, I even understood both of you, which was absolutely fascinating. The question I have is, again, coming from a non-lawyer perspective, coming from outside the profession, as it were. One of the things which strikes me is that this profession does more pro bono work than any other that I've seen. Absolutely fascinating. And the amount of work that the firms do, the individuals do, it is mind-blowing. I mean, I've never seen that in any of the other professions. And I've worked with a few of the professions on this type of work, on poverty reduction and development-related work, on human rights as well. The part which still strikes me, and that links to maybe the cement plant in Gujarat or something like that, that yes, firms here might be able to support, say, the barefoot lawyers or whatever it's called, to do that type of paralegal work or community demystifying of the law. But again, it links to something that Michael said. The plant had lawyers working for them when they set up.
Absolutely.
And how do you, it's more a question for these guys, but partly for you guys, as in how do you bring the two facets together? The pro bono work is lovely, but how do you bring, I think a word which Michael used about scruples and ensuring your clients are using that in their business as usual?
Yeah.
And so that's the part which does strike me as it's not easy to see always.
Yeah. I think it's a great question.
Yeah.
I think it's an excellent question. And I think what characterizes the times we live in is extraordinary concentration of power. Thomas Piketty characterized the United States as perhaps the most unequal country in human history. And for those of us in the room who are corporate lawyers, your job is to serve some of the holders of that concentrated power. And so I think, I honestly think that there is a really important, tough question to ask ourselves as a profession. If we are committed to the rule of law, and if the rule of law, as Michael says, is indivisible, then and if concentration of power poses an inherent threat to that indivisible rule of law, then what role does counsel have in challenging in some way or mitigating the risks of that concentration of power? So for example, just to give you one example, and this came up yesterday, there's good research now on the long-term business risks related to even the electricity is concerned about this issue. Or maybe it's like it's asking us to dance, like it's kind of strobe light. Yeah. I hope to do with you guys later tonight, yeah. There's decent evidence now on the long-term business risks when firms neglect to take into account customary land rights. So people who traditionally have some tenure over the land they live on, when companies run roughshod over that and end up either grabbing their land or exploiting them, that somebody doesn't like what I'm saying. That poses long-term business risks. It can lead to conflict, and it can get you into trouble. If your neighbors hate you, you're going to have a hard time. But the trend right now in firms is very short term. You know, the time horizons are so short term, and so perhaps one of the role for a lawyer who cares about rule of law and the public interest in his or her day-to-day business is to bring attention to those long-term risks. That's just one example, but I think you pose a provocative and important question, and I hope that we can all talk about it honestly, bravely, as she said this morning, over the next couple of days.
We've got him, and then we'll take you. Maybe we can get a mic over to her.
Hello to everybody. My name is Goce Kociuski. I'm coming from Macedonia. I have a brief question for Rector Ignatieff. Coming from a country that in the past 10 years has encountered almost the same problem that Hungary is facing, with total deterioration of the rule of law, total deterioration of the independence of the judiciary, and especially which culminated 1 year ago when there were open threats from the government to close civil society organizations and to initiate a process of desourcization or desorosization of Macedonia. My question is related to one of the key elements of the institutional infrastructure. As you mentioned, independence of the judiciary is one of the key elements in order to have a rule of law. In our two countries, in Macedonia and Hungary, we noticed that in the first stages of going to power of our, for us, previous ruling elite, the first was capture of the judiciary. And my question is whether should we put the pressure not towards the government, but towards the judiciaries? The judges are our colleagues. They went to the same law schools. Their career path went on to the judiciary. Is it any possible to make an activities that we can impact them more profoundly to do their work? If they did their work as it should, I think that the power of the ruling political party, which will be significantly diminished because of that. You mentioned that the constitutional code of Hungary. In Macedonia was the same case. We amended our law on higher education for 30 times in the past 6 years, which significantly impacted the autonomy of the universities and especially the legal certainty. However, in the same case, the constitutional code they have an authority to initiate an official duty procedure for evaluating constitutionality, but they didn't do it. So my question is, what's happening in Hungary with regards to that, and are the judiciary seeing themselves as a public servants and not as someone who should be independent and who should be only obey to the rule of law, not to the ruling party? Thank you.
Oh boy, tough. Another tough
No easy
question.
questions with this crowd.
Yeah.
Well, I opened my big mouth. I got to pay all the consequences. I've been following the news a bit. I've been to Skopje many times and have a great affection for your country, and you know more about it in your little finger than I know in my whole hand, so I got to watch what I say. But I think the challenge both in Hungary and in Macedonia and in Poland, where there are analogous but distinct challenges to the rule of law, the political challenge for the legal profession is to defend its institutions, the independence of the judiciary, the independence of the Constitutional Court, the functions of the judiciary, the payment of the judiciary, the appointment of the judiciary, to defend a robust definition of the rule of law without being sucked into politics. That is, and I'm sitting in front of a senior member of the Hungarian Bar Association. They live this every day, and I want to be very hesitant and respectful about giving them advice, but this is the dilemma. I mean, it's the dilemma I face. I don't want to be sucked into Hungarian politics. I'm not even a citizen of the country, and my wife will tell you my Hungarian is terrible. So I'm trying to stay out of politics, but defend an independent institution. By analogy, Hungarian legal authorities, scholars, professors, members of the Bar Association have a job to protect the independence of the institutions. It's the same thing in Macedonia. Without being sucked in so that you again get nailed as being, oh, you're just trying to overthrow the government or you're just a troublemaker. No, you say, we're trying to defend something that is a benefit to all citizens, irrespective of their political allegiance. And that's what's making this such a tough fight, because this is what I'm talking about, the politics of enemies. The minute you step up, they say, you're just making politics. You say, no, I'm not making politics. I'm trying to defend independent institutions, free institutions that will benefit all citizens. I don't check people's political allegiance when they come to CEU. I'd be out of a job in 30 seconds if I did. You know, we want to have the full plurality of political opinion in a university. We are not engaged in political opposition to the government. We simply want to maintain our independence as the judges, as the lawyers, as the doctors, as the accountants, as all of these institutions have to defend their independence and keep themselves out of politics, but stand up for themselves. This is the trick. And if, you know, and I think I remember in Pakistan, there was the Pakistani legal, the Pakistani lawyers, I use this with care. There may be Pakistani people in the audience who think I got this completely wrong, but my impression was they stood up and said, we're not going to be politicized. We just want to defend the independence of the judiciary and the independence of the Pakistani legal profession. That's the way to do it.
Question over here.
Hi, my name's Cara Irwin. Okay. And I wanted to pick up actually on what our colleague over here said, because something really struck me, which is you said, but hang on, that chemical plant had lawyers too, which is the fact that I think we're really missing out on ensuring that it's not just those of us in the room, because we're all lawyers who are already in the know. We're doing this already in a way we're preaching to the converted. We're sitting here in an underground room talking to a whole lot of like-minded people. But I think something that's really critical is focusing on ensuring that all lawyers, all in-house counsel, and the future generations of lawyers who are right now in legal training are getting the kind of legal training that they need to understand how to use their skills to ensure that not only Vivek's clients of the barefoot lawyers are getting access to justice, but also those lawyers who go through law school somehow manage to get through all of law school and all of their legal careers without ever learning about business and human rights. How does that happen? And I guess a question I'd pose to the panel, because this is something that I'm very passionate about. One of the professional hats I wear is as a legal trainer and educator of both law students and lawyers. And while I focus on legal skills training, embedded in every training that I conduct, whether it's on client interviewing or negotiation, is forcing all of the lawyers and students that are subjected to me to consider for a minute some of these legal justice issues that come up. And I would ask what measures you're taking within CEU, within the law school, for example, to ensure that every one of the law students gets skills training in these critical areas. And then also, Vivek, what you're doing to engage not just all the converted barefoot lawyers, but also the in-house counsel at the chemical plants and the major corporations to understand some of these issues and what the tools are and make sure that they're using those tools.
Just very quickly, I thought that was an excellent question, but it goes back to what I was saying about the fundamental pedagogical job is to teach students the indivisibility of the rule of law, and to do whatever we can in our pedagogy to avoid a kind of early demarcation in which, you know, half of the class or a third of the class goes into human rights law or public interest law. and the rest of them kind of put their heads down and go into commercial. And then never the twain shall meet, and don't bother me about that stuff. I know where I'm going. I'm going to Wall Street, or I'm going down to the equivalent of Wall Street in Budapest, or whatever. And I think it's appropriate for our legal studies department, of which we're very proud, to just say, look, the rule of law is indivisible here. We're not trying to indoctrinate you. But we're just saying you have to be aware of the social consequences, the social context of legal decisions. When you're representing a cement plant in India, you got to know who that's going to affect, what the consequences for a community will be. That's just part of your job description. It's not making nice. It's not doing the ritual human rights check. It's being a responsible lawyer, right? And so it's a matter of starting from the indivisibility of the rule of law, and then having a very strong legal, ethical content to the professional training we think. And I, as a result of this session, will go back with some serious questions to ask of my legal studies department. Are we doing what I'm saying we should be doing? And I can't guarantee you that we are.
Right.
I'm proud of it, but you've all made me think about what we should be doing.
I hope we disagree about something before this is over, because the panel's not fun if there aren't some disagreements. But I got to say, I couldn't agree with the two of you more about this. And I think that the moment of legal education is a really important opportunity. And I would love to see a course on legal empowerment and business and human rights as a mandatory part of every single law school curriculum. I have a small piece of good news for Michael. You might not know this, Michael, but we have something called the Global Legal Empowerment Leadership course at CEU that has been happening for the last.
That you teach,
that
right?
that I teach. It's been happening for the last couple of years. But I would love to see things like that in legal education all the time.
I think Garth wanted to make a comment about this particular issue. Where do we? Is there another mic?
In this discussion, we've been talking about ways in which we make law work for all, and we've particularly talked sort of about the solidarity, the idea that if the rule of law is only working for some, it's ultimately vulnerable, and made that appeal. And Vivek, you've talked about how your particular model uses paralegals to overcome essentially sort of the barrier of the market or the cost. But I wanted to just bring out that the empowerment model does a little bit more than just use paralegals. You focus on making ordinary law work, the law that is being used in that community, not necessarily some specialized body, not necessarily some international framework. It's whatever is relevant and empowering to that community. So I'd like to add sort of a third aspect to this discussion, if I may, the solidarity function, the sort of finance. That is our imagination of how we use law.
Yeah.
Michael's point about law school, where we train sort of public interest lawyers, we train commercial lawyers. The public interest lawyers are often trained to go do battle, to find violations and confront them and stand up to them and seek mechanisms to vindicate them. And what I like about legal empowerment is it doesn't necessarily always do that.
Right.
It sometimes encourages you to think about how do you put your client in a stronger position going forward. It's a little bit more forward-looking.
Yep.
It's about managing the interests and managing the risks that your client might be facing. And I think that's important for commercial lawyers, because I think that's the sort of intellectual framework that they're often using when advising their clients. And so I think part of the bridge that we need to make here is the intellectual one of how we imagine that law works to serve our clients.
Yeah, I agree with that too, Garth. So much of the law that shapes people's lives is administrative law. It's like the ID bureau, the registration bureau where you get your ID card, or the Environmental Protection Agency, or the land, the place where you go to try to register your land rights. And so I do think that we need to broaden how we conceive of law. And one of the advantages of those different things is that you actually don't need a lawyer to go there. And so that's a real opportunity for paralegals and communities to, advocate for themselves, understand and use the law themselves.
Did we have a question or comment over there? Yeah.
Good morning. I found your various inputs incredibly inspirational. Thank you. My name's Erica Emden. I'm from South Africa. I'm the director of a legal NGO called probono.org, a clearinghouse. There are a couple of comments I want to make. We do have in South Africa most of the elements, most of the 5 components of the rule of law that you mentioned. Perhaps the most shaky one is enforcement of court orders, but essentially we have those 5 elements. But what has happened is that really somebody gave a talk at a conference I was at recently. His name is Justice Zach Yacoub. He was one of the justices at our constitutional court. He's now retired. And he said something very interesting about the rule of law. He said, the rule of law must be the rule of law for everybody. So the whole concept of the rule of law as an abstract ideal is wonderful, but if it's not a real lived experience for every member of a society and that everyone doesn't have access to that rule of law, it isn't really the real rule of law that we want. So this takes us to the question of the paralegal and the grassroots community lawyer. What we found in South Africa, and I'd be very interested in the 2 areas that you visited outside Pretoria, because I'm trying to imagine which they are, but they really aren't unique. There are plenty of those kinds of areas. But what I think is of interest in our country, and I think it's a universal issue of interest, is how that rule of law becomes real and lived. And a paralegal movement is that possible link. And I think that what's interesting in what I've observed, and I've worked very, very closely with 2 or 3 community advice officers for the last 10 years, what has become very apparent to me is that immediacy of their understanding of what their communities and what people in their communities need at that very grassroots level. So, for example, I've watched paralegals assist doing 30 to 40 mediations a week, trying to deal with community-based conflicts or personal conflicts. I've seen paralegals agitate at a much more sort of strategic level in big, vast housing projects where members of their community face various housing issues. But what I think is very important, and I think, Vivek, you've really sort of indicated this in your talk, is the support that is needed for the sector. Because what I saw in South Africa is that the sector nearly died. I mean, it basically got some support during apartheid from the anti-apartheid funding sources. But after apartheid since 1994, it did virtually collapse. And now I see a revival, but I mean, it's a very fragile revival. And I think, when we're talking about rule of law, that element of rule of law, that access, I think is critical. And we just have to make sure that in that space, we are trying to collectively look at ways to support that sector.
Did you want to respond to that?
Well, I think that Vivek has already said just how important South Africa was, the whole birth of legal empowerment strategies. I was very struck, and I've taught the Constitution of South Africa and some of the famous cases in economic and social rights in South Africa, and it's been a beacon for 20 years. All I can add, which is hardly news to a South African, is the absolutely enormous gap between the promise of that Constitution and the lived reality and the desperate communities I spent time with. And that gap is both positive and negative. It creates the positive side is people say, you made all these promises. What the hell's happening? That's good in a sense. the legal system creates a constant dynamic of, come on, this isn't how it's supposed to be. You know, you got Jacob Zuma walking clear of any consequences for action. You've got an ANC that's been in power and is a predatory clique. My words, not anybody else's. I take responsibility for them. So you have a legal constitution that has this productive dynamic in the sense that it produces a society that says this isn't good enough. But the negative side is just a degree of disillusion among young people particularly about the very capacity of law to do anything. Laws that the disillusion produces this idea of rule of law as a kind of empty charade that serves only the powerful and the elite. And it gets back to the question about Macedonia. I think that you know, one of the battles in pro bono work is to take the cause of the rule of law into the public realm somehow and make the case for it publicly, unapologetically, without being ensnarled in politics. I mean, it's really difficult in South Africa. If you get up and you say, this place used to be a shining light for the rule of law, let's get back to that path. You're immediately seen as attacking the ANC or you're attacking Zuma. And so the space that we have politically to stand up and say, irrespective of party, irrespective of allegiance, irrespective of where you were under apartheid, where you are now, irrespective of your position in society, this is the roof under which we all shelter. And the roof is leaking. So whatever your politics, let's get up on ladders and make get the roof fixed, right? And this is the challenge in Hungary, it's a challenge in South Africa, it's a challenge in Macedonia. But it's actually to enter the public realm and make the case for this. I mean, to go back to get really, personal. And I thought it was a wonderful story, your grandmother saying, oh, lawyer means liar. Part of the problem we've got is our professions. And I don't single out lawyers, I include, professors and, accountants and dentists. We're regarded as a privileged elite who've done damn well and don't serve the people. And so we have a lot of work to refurbish the public image of these professions.
Absolutely.
Because we can't get up and say, look, we're fighting to keep a roof over all of our heads here, right? That's the claim we have to make, and it's tough at the moment because we've got a lot of populist actors in political systems all over the world saying, these guys betrayed you, these guys let you down, these guys don't stand up for the little guy. And I will, against the lawyers, against the doctors, against the accountants, right? This is the real world we're in. And we've bar associations and legal associations and universities have got to proudly get up and say, we're part of the roof over your head, folks. That's what we do.
Yeah.
You got to understand that. And we have not done as good a job as we need to do.
I just wanted to pick up on something you said. Where'd you go? Oh, there you are. I don't have my glasses on. About the sector being in trouble. And this is heartbreaking for us because this is where paralegals were born, and to see the sector in such bad shape in South Africa really, I think, is a signal for where we are worldwide. And this has been reflected at the global level as well. Does anybody remember the Millennium Development Goals? Remember those?
Yeah.
Yeah? They were adopted in 2000, totally laudable things, essential things. Cut child mortality by 2/3, reduce child hunger in half. And we did make substantial progress during the 15 years, 2000 to 2015, when they were applicable, but we are miserably behind what justice demands. And those original goals totally left out things like the justice, fairness, accountability, corruption, not mentioned. You don't see any of those words in the document. And we are not going to get where justice demands if we don't take those fundamental questions of justice into account. So our community around the world came together to argue that in the new framework, the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, which is sort of succeeding the Millennium Development Goals, that it's really crucial that access to justice and legal empowerment be a part of it. And it was totally unclear till the night before whether we were going to succeed, but we squeaked in the 16th out of 17 goals commits to access to justice for all. Here's the scandal, though. On the day that those SDGs were adopted, almost all of them were accompanied by big commitments. $1 billion from the Gates Foundation and the British government on child nutrition, $25 billion in public-private financing for health care for women and children. On access to justice, we had the words on the paper, but nobody pledged a penny. And so I think that is the challenge and the opportunity that we have right now, that the world recognizes more than ever that you can't have development without justice, that people can't improve their lives if they can't exercise their rights. And what we need to do is turn that nominal recognition into reality.
All right, we've got only 5 minutes remaining, so I suggest we take all remaining questions and then we'll give our speakers a chance for some final thoughts. Got one question here, one there. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. So my name is Daniel Sabo, and I'm from Hungary, representing a large multinational, but my question here will be private, and it is primarily to Michael Ignatieff. You said that the legal profession should stand up for the rule of law, but stay out of politics, and I wonder if that is possible or effective. As an Eastern European, I always looked up on the West for two things. First of all, the West is wealthier than us, and second, they have all these good institutions, which we were not successful, I think, enough in building over the last 25 years. And now I see Western people getting disenchanted with the same institutions, which I find terribly disappointing because there is nobody else to look at as a role model in the world. And somebody has to sell the idea to the people again. And politicians seem to do a bad job at that currently. I hope they will improve. But I wonder if lawyers shouldn't step forward and take on a more political role in doing so. I remember from my studies, I was only 9 years old in 1990, that in Hungary, for example, we had an association of independent legal professionals who took part basically in the political process when Hungary changed from a communist country to a democracy. So their lawyers stepped forward. I wonder whether they shouldn't do that again in some form.
Okay, we're going to take remaining questions all together. There's 1, 2, 3, and then we're done. And please be brief.
Okay. Briefly, hi. Rachel Levitan. I work with HIAS, which is a US-based refugee organization, but has programs around the world. I want to thank you both for your comments. They were really inspiring. I'm particularly interested in the community paralegal model. It's a model that we use in our programs globally. So we work with refugees, train them to train their communities, and then work in communities to identify people most at risk so we can work with them directly. What I'm wondering is how representatives of law firms who are here and corporations who are here can directly engage in this work. We talked a little bit about, and Erica mentioned, the need to provide funding for this type of programming. So that's one important way. I'm curious if there are any good examples of that you can share, or other good examples of ways that a pro bono manager can say, here's how my lawyers are going to help support this local community legal paralegal program.
Another great question. Thank you. We've got 2 back there, I believe.
Oui, bonjour. I am a corporate lawyer. So one of those who are mixing the pro bono work and are mixing also work for big institutions. And the way I'm trying, at least, and this is perhaps it's a question also to you, is to combine this and to see myself in the mirror when shaving every morning, is the fact that I'm independent. So I'm supposed, as a lawyer, as an attorney, to say the truth and to rely on compliance work and to say to a client, well, I'm not in the driver's seat, but you are heading towards a wall. This is what ABC is going to happen if you don't do it this way. Is this kind of, and this is probably also one of the reasons why attorneys are so many in this pro bono job, is to say with independence you can at least keep on moving, keep on getting the client and the big corporations where you want to have. So this is perhaps a slice of optimism. And the second one is also in big law firms, encouraging more and more and spread the good word about pro bono.
One more question back there.
Hi, my name is Li Li. I work for PILnet Beijing office, and today is 19th National Congress of Communist Party. Just happened in Beijing, I think, 7 hours ago. And about the 20% of the whole population in the world, I would like to have more advice from you, like how we, like the international NGO branch offices, to monitor, like encourage more like legal professionals to do more work about the huge people in the world. And thank you.
Thank you.
What was the last one?
I'm sorry.
What was that?
Oh,
I didn't quite catch.
how to encourage, as their role as an international NGO, how to encourage more professional engagement with legal empowerment.
Oh boy, Vivek makes it hard because he passes it to me first. Just one thing, because it's my concluding word. I've enjoyed being with you enormously, and I learned a great deal from this exchange. I learned a lot about how to think about my own legal studies department, for one thing. Second thing to say is that CEU has actually been a beneficiary of some wonderful pro bono legal work done by a very big, fancy New York law firm. And so honesty requires me to thank the legal profession for, they've been helpful to us. And I think that one thing I notice is pro bono work is an important way to attract lawyers to big firms. The promise that you can serve causes that you're important. It's crucial in law schools. That is, the sense that the legal profession is opening up these opportunities, extremely important. And my only concern is, again, to get this bifurcation in which you get, we forget the indivisibility and unity of the rule of law and begin to create kind of two streams of legal education and legal practice that never really touch. And PILnet exists to, just bridge that and stop that. And I think that's enormously positive thing that you're doing, and want to encourage it. And I thought the remark about, being in private commercial practice and wanting to look yourself in the mirror every morning. Hell, I want to look myself in the mirror in the morning too. It ain't easy. That's what we're doing here.
Yeah.
We're all trying to look ourselves in the mirror and say, as we shave or we put on our makeup or whatever we do with our face, I can live with myself. This is the bottom line here for all of us as professionals. The other thing I would just add, to get to the excellent question from my Hungarian colleague, and I want to be very, very careful here. The first thing I'd say is that it is a source of great distress to me that you can look out to rule of law countries like Britain and other places now, and you get a very uncertain reflection in the mirror. I have always hated the condescension that Western Europe has had for Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe doesn't need to take any lessons in freedom from Western Europe, frankly. This place, this country, and every Poland, Czech Republic, these people have given Europe as a whole an unforgettable lesson in freedom. So I don't like to ask you, I don't want anything that I'm saying to imply, oh, There are other countries that have got this fixed, and so Hungary needs to line up and look through the window at how wonderfully they do. What I actually think is completely different. I think the rule of law is in trouble everywhere, actually. I think we are actually in the same boat. And this is not meant to be a polemical remark about the Trump administration or this. The battle for the rule of law is continuous, unending. There is no constitution that transports you safely to a place where the rule of law is without contest or difficulty. In my little list of the 5 criteria for the rule of law that I just wrote down, there isn't a country that checks the box for everyone perfectly. And so the advice I would give to Hungarian lawyers is not different than I would give to any group of professionals in any country. The rule of law is in trouble everywhere, frankly. Its maintenance depends on the capacity of professional associations, universities, law students, barefoot lawyers, everybody to say, this isn't political, guys. This is the roof under all our heads. That's what we're trying to do, to protect everybody with this roof. And it requires enormous political skill to step up as a professional association in Hungary and say, look, folks, we need independent courts. We need justice for all. We need a civil society space in which people can represent their clients without being accused of betraying the nation. This is very difficult work, and I can't counsel you because it wouldn't be appropriate, but I do believe as a general principle that unless lawyers and other professional groups and universities stand up to defend their independence, democracy as a whole will suffer, and the rule of law will be the victim.
Vivek, you get the final word.
Okay, just quickly. You ended on independence, and that was the value that the gentleman in the back mentioned. I do think that that is one of the really precious traditions related to the legal profession, and it's important, and we need to hold on to it. I just wanted to pick up on the very welcome practical question about how firms can get more involved. I do think it's tricky, and I would say it's live for us. Like we're thinking about this too, and I don't think it's totally simple. The financial side is simple. It's not hard. Like we would really welcome more investment by firms and by governments and by private citizens in legal empowerment, and that's actually not too complicated. The wielding of skills actually isn't that simple, because so much, as Garth mentioned, and as I think you mentioned, Michael, so much of what legal empowerment is about is so context specific. It's like local, so trying to understand how to work the local institutions. And so paralegals need to be connected to lawyers. That's part of the deal. Like you don't train them and send them on their way. They need to be part of a vertical network that includes lawyers. But those lawyers really need to understand and be close to the specific context that the paralegals are in. So there may be some room for pro bono lawyers to be part of that vertical network. I also feel like one thing that I would encourage the folks at private firms to do is think about your power. Where does your power lie? And wield that power in a way that advances justice. So that may not be flying across the world to do a training for paralegals in a legal system that you're not familiar with. It might be helping to figure out who was financing that cement plant and what conditions is it operating under. Because that's something that those folks can't do without you. You know, they may not be able to do without you. So I would encourage all of you to think about, where does my power lie and how can I wield that to challenge this huge concentration of power that characterizes our times.
So the reminder is that the battle for the rule of law is never ending, that we each have power that we can wield to be a part of that battle and to be a force for good. Thank you.
Thank you.